What if the X-Men are the reason Apocalypse exists? Not metaphorically, not as a consequence of their failure. What if they travel back to ancient Egypt, trying to fix the timeline, and in doing so, accidentally hand a young mutant named N-Saba-Noor the technology that turns him into the most powerful villain in X-Men history? That's the theory the Season 2 trailer is quietly, deliberately building toward. And if it's true, it means everything the X-Men do to prevent the apocalyptic future they keep seeing in their visions is the exact thing that creates it. Welcome back to X-Men 97, where the timeline is broken, Kang has shown up in a Sphinx, and someone in the writer's room has clearly read every issue of every X-Men comic ever published. Let's break all of it down. Previously on X-Men. Those 3 words, that specific music sting, the fact that hearing it still hits the same way it did in 1992 is a testament to what this show has built across its first season. X-Men 97 isn't just nostalgia, it's one of the most critically acclaimed animated series in recent memory, a show that took a beloved 90s property and treated it with more thematic seriousness and emotional ambition than most live-action superhero projects manage. And Season 1 ended on an absolutely brutal cliffhanger. The X-Men scattered across time, Genosha in ruins, the team fractured across different eras with no clear path home. And lurking over all of it, the shadow of Apocalypse, the most powerful mutant villain in the entire franchise, growing across thousands of years of history. Season 2 is picking up all of those threads, and based on the new trailer footage, it's doing it with a scope and a level of comic book accuracy that is going to make longtime fans lose their minds. Ancient Egypt, a dystopian far future, the present-day team trying to rebuild, a time-traveling conqueror, a family reunion that is actually heartbreaking if you know the lore. And Easter eggs so specific they required pausing the footage frame by frame to find. Let's start with the biggest one. The central mystery of Season 2 is built around a question the show is taking its time answering. How does N-Saba-Noor, a young mutant in ancient Egypt, become Apocalypse? The X-Men stranded in the past meet him before he becomes the tyrant they know. And here's the brilliant structural choice the writers are making. They don't immediately connect the dots. They don't look at this kid and think, that's Apocalypse. They see a mutant, a young, powerful, potentially dangerous mutant, in an era that has no context for what mutants are or what they might become. Professor X, meanwhile, is experiencing visions. Red skies, a devastated future, the kind of imagery the show uses to signal cosmic-level threat rather than just a standard villain. He's realizing, gradually through the trailer's pacing, that something much larger is in motion, that the scattered X-Men aren't just victims of a random temporal accident. They've been placed in specific points in time for a reason, or their presence in those specific points is causing something. And this is where the theory that's been absolutely dominating the X-Men 97 Reddit community lands. What if the X-Men cause Apocalypse's rise? Time travel stories have a name for this. A predestination paradox, sometimes called a bootstrap paradox, is when the thing you travel back to prevent is actually caused by your act of traveling back. The classic example is going back to kill Hitler as a child, but your presence in that time period is actually what radicalizes him in the first place. The X-Men go to the past to stop Apocalypse. Their presence in ancient Egypt, their advanced technology, their powers, their interactions with the young N-Saba-Noor, who might otherwise have lived and died as an ordinary if extraordinary mutant, is the catalyst. They give him context for what he is, or they give him access to something that changes everything. And what they might give him access to is the most exciting new addition to the Season 2 roster. Kang the Conqueror is in this trailer. Kang is one of the biggest names in Marvel, especially post-Loki and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. A time-traveling villain showing up in a season about time-scattered X-Men makes complete narrative sense. But for deep comic book readers, this reveal is something else entirely. Because this isn't Kang in his standard purple armor. This is Kang in his Ramatut form, and that is one of the most significant deep cuts in the history of Marvel animation. Here's the lore. Kang the Conqueror, real name Nathaniel Richards, a regular human born in the distant future, got bored. He was a scholar, not a fighter. He discovered the time platform blueprints originally designed by Dr. Doom, built his own version, and traveled back to ancient Egypt to rule as a god. He called himself Ramatut, established himself as pharaoh, used future technology to maintain divine authority over a civilization that had no framework for understanding what he actually was. This was his very first appearance in Marvel Comics, not as the armored conqueror most people know, as a man in ancient Egypt, hiding behind advanced technology and playing God. And the Sphinx, the city ship that Beast spotted at the end of Season 1 and couldn't quite place, that's Kang's Sphinx, his time vessel, disguised as the most iconic structure in Egyptian history. It was sitting there the whole time, in plain sight, a piece of future technology so far beyond the understanding of the ancient world that it was just incorporated into the mythology. The symbols on Kang's technology are worth pausing on. They have a very specific visual similarity to celestial tech, the same kind of imagery we saw in the MCU's Eternals and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And in the comics, Apocalypse's iconic armor is celestial in origin. His power levels, his near immortality, his ability to restructure his own biology, all of it is connected to celestial technology he eventually acquires. If Apocalypse acquires that technology from Kang's Sphinx, if the X-Men's intervention creates the conditions for a young En-Sabah Noor to access future tech that was never supposed to exist in ancient Egypt, then the paradox isn't just theoretical. It's the engine of the entire season. The X-Men create Apocalypse by trying to stop him, and they might not realize it until it's already happened. Let's slow down here, because this storyline is the one that's going to hit the hardest emotionally, and it deserves to be treated with the weight it carries. Cyclops and Jean Grey are stranded in a dystopian far future. Devastated landscape, Apocalypse's forces everywhere, no clear path home. That part is straightforward action-adventure. But they're not alone. They're with Nathan. If you know the comics, that name lands with enormous force. Nathan Summers, the child who grows up to become Cable. In the comics, Nathan was infected as an infant with a techno-organic virus by Apocalypse. And the only way to save him was to send him 1,000 years into the future, where there might be a cure. He grew up there, without his parents, became Cable, eventually returned to the present. And the tragedy of Scott and Jean's relationship with their son is one of the most persistent sources of grief in the entire X-Men mythology. The show is giving them something the comics never really allowed: time. The chance to actually raise him, even in the middle of an apocalyptic hellscape, even knowing they have to get back, and that this version of Nathan's childhood isn't what was supposed to happen. Every scene of Cyclops and Jean fighting together to protect their son carries the weight of what we know their future looks like. This is the family they should have had. This is the version of their lives that the Marvel Universe keeps taking from them. And watching them have it, temporarily, imperfectly, surrounded by enemies in a ruined world, is going to be devastating in exactly the way X-Men stories are supposed to be devastating. In the present-day timeline, both Scott and Jean are wearing the Frank Quitely new X-Men uniforms, the sleek black leather looks from Grant Morrison's legendary 2001 run, which is widely considered one of the greatest X-Men comic runs ever written. The show is honoring its source material across multiple eras simultaneously. And the combat sequence, where Jean uses psionic energy to create Wolverine-style claws, deflecting Scott's optic blasts to take out a group of enemies in one coordinated move, is the kind of creative power usage that makes you remember why these characters have sustained 50 years of stories. She's not just a telepath, she's a physicist with access to the fundamental forces of the universe. And the show is finally treating her that way. Back in the present, or 1998, in the show's internal timeline, Bishop and Forge are left with the wreckage of the X-Mansion and the task of assembling whatever team they can from whoever is still on Earth. Let's run through the character updates because several of them are genuinely significant. Wolverine is back, with his adamantium. After the brutal moment in Season 1 where we saw him with bone claws, which, if you know the comics history, is one of the most viscerally shocking things the original cartoon ever acknowledged, his return to full form, gets a triumphant visual payoff. He strikes the classic pose, points a finger, says 3 words, "I'm back." And every 90s kid watching this collectively exhaled. Storm is flying into space to call a cosmic storm down, which is exactly as magnificent as it sounds, and exactly the scale of power the original cartoon always undersold. Aurora Monroe is not a weather controller, she is a goddess, and the show is finally giving her the visual language to match that reality. Jubilee is in a sleek black suit that hardcore fans will recognize as her look from the Wolverine and Jubilee vampire arc in the comics. Whether the show goes anywhere near that storyline is an open question. Nothing in this show is random. Archangel is back in his Archangel form, the blue-skinned, metal-winged version Warren becomes after his transformation by Apocalypse, and his presence in a season heavily focused on Apocalypse's origins is obviously deliberate. The man whose life was permanently changed by this villain is going to have something specific to do and a story about that villain's origins. The show is setting up a confrontation that carries personal stakes beyond the standard hero-villain dynamic. And then there's the X-Factor twist. The team is back and active, led by Valerie Cooper, who sided with the mutants against Bastion in Season 1 and is now apparently running an official operation. But here's the theory that's been circulating. Valerie Cooper in a position of growing power over mutant affairs, moving pieces around a board with an agenda that isn't entirely visible? Is that actually Mystique? It is genuinely the most Mystique thing imaginable. Infiltrate the institution, rise to a position of influence, pursue a long-term goal while appearing to be an ally. Mystique has been doing this in the comics since before most current readers were born, and the show has established her as a character with her own complex agenda that doesn't always align with either the X-Men or their enemies. If that's her, the reveal is going to be one of the season's best moments. If it isn't her, the show has still planted the doubt effectively enough that every Cooper scene is going to carry suspicion. Okay, this is the section for the comic readers, for the people who paused the trailer at specific moments and then had to sit down. There's a scene with Morph and Lady Deathstrike rummaging through digital records, and the bit of comedy here, Morph defending DVDs, Lady Deathstrike preferring laserdiscs because of Japan's deeper cultural attachment to the format, is exactly the kind of detail that makes X-Men 97 different from every other superhero animation. It's funny and specific and gives minor characters genuine personality in a throwaway gag. But if you pause on the actual content of those records, that's where it gets genuinely extraordinary. The files contain a roster of super-powered individuals connected to the Weapon Plus program, and the names on that list are a love letter to 5 decades of Marvel Comics. Phantom X, listed as Weapon 13, the French thief and assassin created by the Weapon Plus program as a living weapon designed to be deployed against mutants. A character from Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, whose moral ambiguity and unreliable narration made him one of the most interesting additions to the X-Men mythology in decades. Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, listed explicitly, which confirms that in the X-Men 97 animated universe, Bucky's Hydra history is canon. The Marvel animated universe and the comics' shared histories are being acknowledged simultaneously. Luke Cage listed as Weapon 6, tying him directly to the Weapon Plus program, the same government project that produced Wolverine. In the comics, this connection exists, but has never been heavily explored. The show surfacing it in a background detail is the kind of thing that makes you wonder whether it's pure Easter egg or future setup. And Weapon 18, crossed out in blood. Nobody knows what Weapon 18 is. It's not established canon. It's something the show put in that frame deliberately, knowing that people would pause and find it and spend months theorizing about it. Is it a destroyed Iron Man armor? An obscure mutant? Something the writers are planning to introduce? The crossed out blood is the detail. That's not administrative notation. That's something being erased, something being buried, something that someone wanted removed from the record. That's a thread, and the show left it hanging deliberately. Let's zoom out for a second, because X-Men 97 doesn't exist in a vacuum. Marvel animation right now is in a genuinely exciting space. The live-action slate has been navigating its own turbulence. The post-Endgame era has had some genuine high points and some acknowledged stumbles. But the animated universe has been delivering consistently, What if Spider-Man freshman year and X-Men 97 have established a version of Marvel storytelling that takes its source material seriously and trusts its audience with genuine complexity? Season 2 is operating at a scope that rivals the live-action projects in ambition. A multi-generational war across thousands of years, converging on a present-day showdown with the oldest and arguably most powerful villain in X-Men history. Characters we've followed across seasons finally having the confrontations their arcs have been building toward. And a creative team clearly operating with deep love for and knowledge of the source material. The upcoming Marvel landscape, Spider-Man Brand New Day, the build toward Avengers Doomsday, is going to generate enormous amounts of content and conversation. But X-Men 97 has established itself as the crown jewel of Marvel animation, the standard that everything else is being measured against. Season 2 doesn't look like it's lowering that standard. Here's the thing about X-Men stories that has always made them different from other superhero stories. They're never really about the powers. The powers are just the metaphor. They're about what it costs to be different in a world that hasn't decided whether to accept or destroy you. About chosen family as the only real protection against a society that sees you as a threat. About the exhausting, endless work of fighting for a world that might never actually want you in it. Season 1 of X-Men 97 understood that completely. It took that metaphor and applied it to everything: grief, trauma, genocide, the specific horror of watching something you built and loved be taken from you. And it did it with an animation style and a tonal register that felt like honoring the legacy rather than exploiting one. Season 2 is taking those same characters and throwing them across time, across thousands of years of history, into the origin of the thing that has been threatening them their entire lives. And somewhere in ancient Egypt, a young mutant named En-Saba-Nur is about to meet the people whose very presence might turn him into the worst thing the X-Men have ever faced. The question is whether knowing that, whether having seen the future, changes anything at all. Did you catch the Weapon 18 crossed out in blood? What do you think it is? And are you on the side of the X-Men cause apocalypse? Or is there another explanation for the paradox the show is setting up? Because I've been thinking about it since the trailer dropped, and I still don't have an answer, which means the show is doing exactly what it's supposed to.